The smoke rising from the inner chamber had nothing to do with prayer. It smelled of rendered fat, scorched resin, and something older than language, something primal. The year is 146 BC. Carthage is dying. A black haze swallows the horizon, so dense that the sun looks like a wound refusing to close. And inside the great temple, behind walls that have stood for 600 years, the most powerful families in the Western Mediterranean are not fleeing. They are gathered, waiting, choosing. Above them, a massive bronze idol of Ba'al Hammon glows the color of molten iron. Its open arms are an altar. Its belly is a furnace. The rhythmic pounding of war drums shakes the stone floor beneath their feet, timed precisely to mask what comes next. Because tonight, the merchant princes and warrior lords of Carthage are not bartering in silver or grain. They are offering something no market has ever priced: their own noble daughters, their priestesses, fed to the fire in one final desperate transaction with a god who has never answered. For 2,000 years, we accepted one version of this story. Rome triumphed because Rome was superior. Discipline, strategy, will. End of discussion. But that was never the full truth. Buried beneath that victory was one of the most sophisticated disinformation campaigns ever executed in the ancient world. To justify the complete annihilation of a rival civilization, Rome did not simply defeat Carthage. It rewrote who the Carthaginians were. Roman senators, historians, and propagandists painted their enemy as fanatics who burned their own mothers and daughters alive in pitch-black sacrificial pits known as the Tophet. And the world believed it. For centuries, no one questioned it. It was the perfect cover story for genocide dressed in moral authority. But then, the archaeologists arrived. Beneath the ruins of Salambo, sealed urns were cracked open for the first time in millennia, and the bones inside did not match the Roman story. Not even close. Tonight, we enter the Tophet. We are going to pull apart the machinery of an ancient cult and the propaganda engine of an empire. We are going to hold the evidence up to the light and ask the question Rome never wanted asked. Were the lords of Carthage truly burning their own in rituals too dark to name? Or were they the target of the most devastating character assassination in recorded history? The answer is sealed in ash and bone, and we are about to unseal it. Before we go deeper, drop a comment with the city and country you are watching from right now. Subscribe if you have not already, and help us keep this project alive. You are watching Ancestral, the best dark history channel in the world. The wealth of Carthage was not inherited from the heavens. It was ripped from the earth and dragged from the ocean floor. By 264 BC, the city occupied a narrow peninsula on the North African coast, and from that sliver of land, it projected a shadow across every coastline in the Mediterranean. Carthage did not simply participate in trade, it strangled it. The city controlled the choke points. It owned the Strait of Sicily. It dictated who could sail west and who would sink trying. At the center of this dominion sat the Kothon, a harbor so precisely engineered that foreign diplomats who visited it reportedly fell silent at the sight. The outer basin handled civilian commerce, hundreds of merchant vessels rotating through its docks in a ceaseless rhythm of cargo and coin. But concealed behind that civilian front lay the true engine of Carthaginian supremacy. A circular military port, perfectly symmetrical, housing 220 warships in covered berths. These were quincarims, 5 banked killing machines fitted with reinforced bronze rams designed to gut enemy hulls below the waterline. And the men who powered them were not chained prisoners dragged aboard in desperation. They were citizens, free men of Carthage, trained from adolescence, compensated like professionals. They rode with precision because they believed in the empire they propelled. The city behind them sat inside 34 miles of fortified limestone walls, each section rising 40 feet into the sky, thick enough to contain barracks, armories, and stabling chambers for 300 war elephants. Carthage was not merely defended. It was sealed shut like a vault made of stone and ambition. The source of that ambition was purely material. Carthaginian power flowed from extraction. Deep in the mountains of the Iberian Peninsula, Carthaginian mining operations pulled millions of tons of raw silver from shafts that ran so far underground the workers never saw daylight during their shifts. That silver bought everything. It purchased tin from the fog-covered coasts of Britannia. It secured Nubian gold through overland caravans that crossed the Sahara. But the commodity that elevated Carthage above every competitor was a substance so rare and so repulsive to produce that only a civilization built on industrial ruthlessness could have monopolized it. Tyrian purple. The dye was harvested from the mucus glands of the murex sea snail. Producing a single ounce required the methodical crushing and slow rotting of 10,000 individual shells. The processing vats in the lower quarters of the city emitted a stench so foul it permanently saturated the surrounding streets. The chemical compound bonded to the skin of the laborers and never washed off. Their hands were stained for life. Yet monarchs and emperors from Egypt to Greece to the distant courts of Persia paid extraordinary sums of unworked gold for a single bolt of fabric dipped in that color. The aristocrats of Carthage draped themselves in it as casual attire. They ate reclining on floors of imported marble. They drank from vessels of hammered gold. They accumulated so much surplus wealth that they simply purchased war itself. Mercenary armies from Gaul, from Numidia, from the tribal kingdoms of Iberia marched under Carthaginian banners not out of loyalty or ideology, but because Carthage wrote the largest checks in the ancient world. They bought soldiers, they bought navies, they bought the silence of kings. But there is a sickness that only absolute wealth can produce. When a civilization possesses everything, it develops a pathological terror of loss. The Carthaginian ruling class did not worship their gods the way a child loves a parent. They dealt with their gods the way a debtor deals with a creditor who has the power to destroy him. The theology revolved around two supreme figures, Ba'al Hammon, master of storms, harvests, and atmospheric destruction, and Tanit, the goddess of fertility, war, and the continuation of bloodlines. These were not benevolent guardians. These were transactional entities. The entire spiritual framework of Carthage operated on the logic of binding obligation. The ancient term for this arrangement was a mulk, a sacred vow, a debt sworn against the soul. You asked the sky for something. The sky granted it. And then the sky came to collect. The collection operated with the mechanical precision of a financial institution. If a merchant prince needed safe passage for a fleet crossing violent waters to reach the tin deposits of Britannia, he entered the sanctuary and swore a mulk. If every ship returned with its hull intact and its cargo dry, the debt activated. Payment was due. If a Carthaginian general besieging a Greek stronghold in Sicily needed the tide of battle to turn, he swore a mulk. And here is where the system revealed its true architecture. The cost of repayment scaled in direct proportion to the magnitude of the request. You did not beg the Lord of Hurricanes to annihilate an enemy armada and then settle the bill with the carcass of a goat. A goat was pocket change to a man who owned 40 ships. The gods demanded evidence of genuine sacrifice. They demanded the offering of the single asset the petitioner valued more than his own survival. They demanded human life. For generations, popular history focused almost exclusively on the sacrifice of infants. But recent forensic archaeology has fractured that narrative wide open. The sealed urns excavated beneath the precinct of Salambo do not contain only the remains of newborns. They contain the calcified bones of fully grown, high-status women. This detail changes everything. These were not nameless captives, dragged from a holding cell. Offering a slave to Ba'al Hammon carried no spiritual weight because a slave represented no personal cost. The entire mechanism of the ritual depended on agony. The currency was not flesh. The currency was grief. The women whose ashes filled those urns occupied the absolute pinnacle of Carthaginian society. They were the wives of the Tophets, the twin magistrates who governed the republic. They were the senior priestesses of the sanctuary of Tanit, women who held direct spiritual authority over the population. They were the daughters of the admirals who commanded the Quinquereme fleet. These women were not decorative figures standing silently behind powerful men. They were operational pillars of the empire. They brokered political alliances through strategic marriages. They administered sprawling agricultural estates and managed commercial enterprises while their husbands spent years on foreign campaigns. To surrender one of these women to the fire was to deliberately sever a structural support beam of the state, and the state agreed to it. Repeatedly. Willingly. Because the historical record appeared to confirm the method. Every time Carthage faced an existential crisis, the fires in the Tophet were lit. And every time, Carthage survived. They shattered the Greek colonies in Sicily. They crushed internal revolts that should have torn the Republic apart. They expanded their territorial reach decade after decade. Each survival reinforced the equation. Elite blood purchased divine intervention. The math was brutal, but the math was consistent. Over centuries, the superstition calcified into codified law. It became as routine and as legally binding as a tax. Now we must enter the physical reality of the final transaction. The year is 146 BC. The Third Punic War has entered its last, suffocating chapter. Scipio Aemilianus, the most methodical Roman general of his generation, has drawn a noose around the city so tight that nothing living passes through it. Roman engineers have severed every aqueduct feeding the population. The fleet has sealed the harbor entrance with a stone causeway. Inside the walls, the common citizens of Carthage are past the point of rationing. They are boiling strips of leather armor and saddle straps for whatever nutrition remains in the hide. Bodies line the alleyways. Disease spreads faster than rumor. The aristocracy, huddled behind the secondary walls of the Bersa citadel, arrives at a final, horrifying conclusion. Their silver vaults are meaningless now. No mercenary army is coming. The foreign soldiers abandoned the city months ago. Every conventional contract has failed. The only contract that remains is the one written in fire. The debt to the sky must be settled in full. The Tophet of Salambo sits just south of the city center, nestled against the inner curve of the southern wall. It is not a grand temple perched on a marble summit. It is an open-air enclosure, ringed by a low wall of rough-cut stone. The ground beneath is centuries of compacted earth mixed with powdered calcium from thousands of previous cremations. The soil itself is partly made of human remains. Rows upon rows of carved stelae stand crammed together at irregular angles, each one a marker for a fulfilled vow. The inscriptions etched into the stone read with the flat, emotionless precision of a financial ledger. To the Lady Tanit, face of Baal, and to the Lord Ba'al Hammon, that which was vowed. No names of the dead, no elegies, no grief. Just confirmation that a payment was processed. The air above the precinct ripples with residual heat from fires that have burned in cycles for over 400 years. The priests initiate the final sequence. There are no iron shackles. There are no chains dragging unwilling victims across the stone. The restraint is theological. It is invisible and absolute. The noble women selected for the offering are bathed in fragrant oils imported from the coastal cities of the Levant. They are dressed in garments woven from pure, undyed linen, white as bone. Their hair is braided and threaded with thin strands of gold wire that catch the firelight. They walk through the shattered streets of the besieged city in a slow, deliberate procession. Citizens who have not eaten in days collapse to their knees as the women pass. The state apparatus does not describe what is about to happen as an execution. The official language frames it as an ascension, a promotion from the mortal plane to the divine ledger. The women are told they are not dying. They are being elevated. The psychological state of these women is the single most disturbing dimension of this entire procedure. The forensic and textual evidence points to two possibilities, and neither offers comfort. The first is pharmacological suppression. The women consumed large quantities of undiluted wine saturated with the extracted sap of the opium poppy or the seeds of henbane. Both substances, in sufficient concentration, slow the heartbeat to a crawl. They produce a dissociative fog that severs the conscious mind from the sensory processing of pain. The women would have walked to the altar in a waking stupor, physically present, but neurologically detached from what was about to happen to their bodies. The second possibility is far more disturbing. They went willingly, fully conscious, eyes open, hearts pounding, because they had been conditioned from the first breath they ever drew to believe that this moment was the highest honor a Carthaginian woman could achieve. They did not see the fire as destruction. They saw it as a transaction that would save every person they had ever loved. They embraced the flames with the same conviction a soldier carries into a charge he knows he will not survive. The apparatus that received them was a masterwork of ancient engineering designed for a single, monstrous purpose. The statue of Ba'al Hammon dominated the enclosed ritual space. It was cast from solid bronze. The body was sculpted in the shape of a powerful male figure. The head was that of a bull, broad and heavy, with curved horns that framed the open sky above. The arms extended forward from the torso, palms wide, angled sharply downward toward the earth. Beneath those outstretched hands, a deep stone-lined pit held a bed of charcoal so dense that the heat rising from it bent the air into visible distortion. The priests fed the fire with seasoned olive wood, chosen for its density and its capacity to burn at extreme temperatures with minimal smoke. The flames surged upward and licked the underside of the bronze limbs. Over the course of hours, the metal absorbed enough thermal energy to glow a deep, furious red. The radiant heat pushed the gathered crowd back several rows. The priests conducting the ceremony wore masks constructed from the cleaned skulls of bulls and rams, lined internally with layers of wet linen to protect their own faces from the blistering waves of superheated air. Then, the drums began. Enormous tympanum drums, their surfaces stretched with cured oxhide pulled so tight the skin was nearly translucent. Musicians struck them with heavy wooden mallets in a synchronized, unrelenting rhythm. The sound was not ceremonial. It was not musical. It was industrial. A pounding, bone-deep concussion designed to overwhelm the auditory system of every person standing within 50 meters. Bone flutes joined the percussion. Their shrill, piercing tone cut through the smoke, and the noise like a blade through cloth. The combined acoustic assault served one practical, calculated function. It built an impenetrable wall of sound. It ensured that the husbands and fathers standing in the crowd could not hear what was about to happen on the platform above them. The selected woman steps onto the raised stone surface. The lead priest approaches. In his hand is a short, curved blade forged from ceremonial bronze, its edge honed to surgical sharpness. The ritual demands absolute precision. The woman is guided onto the searing bronze palms of the statue. The angle of the arms does the rest. The body cannot remain on the superheated surface. It slides forward and downward, falling directly into the open charcoal pit below. The linen garments ignite on contact. The skin blackens before the body fully settles into the glowing bed of embers. The subcutaneous fat renders almost instantly, feeding the flames a fresh accelerant. A thick column of greasy, dark smoke rises from the pit and climbs toward the ash-choked sky. The priests call this column the breath of the fulfilled vow. It carries the terms of the contract upward to the gods. The merchant lord who surrendered his wife stands somewhere in the pressing crowd. He watches the smoke spiral above the precinct walls. His face is stone. His jaw is locked. He does not weep. He does not flinch. To display grief is to communicate doubt, and doubt voids the contract entirely. The theology demands total conviction. He must witness the incineration of his own household with perfect, unbroken composure. In his mind, the transaction is already complete. He assumes the feeling of the wish fulfilled. He believes with every fiber of his being that by tomorrow morning the Roman siege lines will collapse, that disease will gut the legions, that a storm will scatter the blockade fleet. He has paid the highest tax any man can pay. Surely, the sky will answer. This is the kind of history that resists easy digestion. It forces a confrontation with the raw mechanics of power, faith, and the terrifying things human beings will do when they believe the math justifies the cost. And this is precisely why we exist. We do not soften the past. We do not sanitize it for comfort. We crack open the sealed chambers and examine what is actually inside. If this level of depth is something you refuse to let disappear from this platform, then it is time to take one step further. I want to personally invite you to join The Lineage, our channel membership. This is not a passive subscription. This is an active declaration. By joining, you become part of the inner circle. You become one of the people who make these investigations possible. The algorithm rewards safe, shallow content. The lineage is what allows us to go deeper without compromise. Members receive exclusive content, early access to upcoming investigations, and a seat among a community that does not look away when the truth gets uncomfortable. If this is where you belong, the button is directly below this video. The smoke over the Tophet fades to a thin gray thread. The embers in the pit cool to white ash. The surviving aristocrats of Carthage retreat behind the walls of the Bersa to wait. They have fulfilled the ancient contract. They have paid in the only currency the gods accept. Now they wait for the divine counterstrike. A hurricane to shatter the Roman fleet. A pestilence to hollow out the legions camped beyond the walls. Anything. The sun rises the next morning over a silent city. No storm materializes. No plague descends. The sky offers nothing. What arrives instead is the sound of Roman war horns echoing across the harbor. The legions breach the outer fortifications at the Megara district. Scipio Aemilianus enters Carthage on horseback, flanked by columns of infantry moving through streets so narrow the soldiers' shields scrape the walls on both sides. The Romans do not bring deliverance. They bring an annihilation so systematic, so thorough, that it will make the fires of the Tophet look like a candle guttering in a breeze. And when Roman scholars and military scribes finally step into the ash-covered precinct of Ba'al Hammon. They pause. They survey the stele. They examine the scorched pit. They study the residue. And in that moment, they understand they have discovered something far more valuable than Carthaginian gold. They have found the ultimate weapon. Not a sword, not a siege engine, a story. They will not simply destroy Carthage. They will steal its darkest rituals, twist them beyond recognition, and forge from those ashes the most devastating propaganda campaign the ancient world has ever witnessed. Rome did not learn to hate Carthage because of theology. Rome learned to hate Carthage because Carthage taught Rome what it felt like to die. Before the Senate could manufacture the propaganda that would turn the Tophet into a symbol of barbarism, the Republic first had to experience a wound so catastrophic that it permanently altered the Roman understanding of vulnerability. That wound has a name. That wound has a date. August 216 BC. The flatlands of Apulia in southern Italy shimmer under a punishing summer sun. A scorching, grit-laden wind the locals call the Volturnus sweeps across the plain, driving fine particles of dust directly into the faces of the largest military force the Roman Republic has ever assembled. 80,000 infantry. The entire fighting strength of 8 full legions plus their allied contingents. The Senate has pooled everything it has into a single, decisive hammer blow intended to crush one man, Hannibal Bersa. The Carthaginian general who crossed the Alps with an army and war elephants and has spent the last 2 years dismantling Roman armies on Roman soil. The plan is simple, overwhelmingly simple. Mass the infantry into a dense rectangular block. Push forward. Use sheer physical tonnage to shatter the Carthaginian center. Roman commanders have used this tactic for generations. It has never failed. Today, it will be the instrument of their annihilation. Hannibal sees the Roman mass advancing and he lets it come. His center line, composed of Gallic and Iberian infantry, bends backward under the pressure. It sags like a net absorbing a stone. The Roman legionaries interpret this as collapse. They surge deeper. They pack tighter. They push harder into the retreating pocket. They do not notice the geometry closing around them. On both flanks, Hannibal's Libyan heavy infantry, veteran soldiers armored in equipment stripped from previously defeated Roman armies, pivots inward like 2 iron doors swinging shut. Behind the Roman formation, the Numidian cavalry under Maharbal has already routed the Roman horsemen, and now wheels back to seal the only remaining exit. The envelope is complete. 80,000 men are trapped in a compressing ring of bronze and iron. What follows is not a battle. It is a 6-hour industrial process of killing. The Roman formation is so densely packed that soldiers in the interior cannot lift their arms above their shoulders. They cannot swing their swords. They cannot raise their shields. They stand chest to back, suffocating under the weight of the men pressing from behind, while Carthaginian mercenaries work the edges of the formation with methodical, mechanical precision. The blood flowing from the perimeter saturates the dry Apulian dirt and transforms it into a thick, adhesive red mud that sucks at the sandals of the dying. Roman soldiers pinned beneath mounds of fallen comrades claw shallow depressions in the earth and press their faces into the holes to suffocate themselves faster. The Carthaginian and Numidian troops slash the hamstrings of the wounded and leave them face down in the heat to bleed out over hours. Hannibal surveys the field at dusk. The plain looks like a landscape painting rendered exclusively in red and brown. He gives a single order. His soldiers move through the Roman dead and strip the gold signet rings from the fingers of every fallen aristocrat and officer. The collection fills multiple baskets. Hannibal ships those rings across the Mediterranean to the Carthaginian Senate. He pours them onto the floor of the assembly chamber in a glittering, clinking cascade. Thousands of gold rings, each one representing the severed finger of a Roman nobleman, each one a receipt for a life extinguished. Rome loses approximately 1/5 of its entire adult male population in a single afternoon at Cannae. The trauma does not merely damage the Republic. It fractures something fundamental in the Roman identity. For the first time in their collective memory, they understand that they can be hunted, that they can be reduced to meat on a field. That feeling never leaves. It metastasizes into something far more dangerous than grief. It becomes a permanent, institutional rage. And Rome does not respond to this rage with the stoic discipline it will later mythologize about itself. It responds with blind, flailing panic. The political architecture of the Republic buckles. The Senate, confronted with the possibility that Hannibal might march on the city itself, reaches for the most primitive tool available. The priests are summoned. They unseal the Sibylline books, the Republic's sacred prophetic texts, guarded in a stone vault beneath the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. The priests study the verses. They deliver their prescription. The city must be spiritually purified. The contamination of defeat must be washed away with an offering. In 216 BC, the same year as Cannae, Roman soldiers escort 4 prisoners to the Forum Boarium, the cattle market at the center of the city. 2 Gauls, 1 man and 1 woman. 2 Greeks, 1 man and 1 woman. They are marched past the market stalls and the butcher blocks to a subterranean stone chamber cut into the earth beneath the forum. They are forced inside. The heavy stone cover is dragged across the opening and sealed. They are buried alive. No ceremony, no golden wire, no drums to mask the sound. Just 4 foreign human beings suffocating in the dark because the Roman state needed to feel in control again. This is state-sanctioned human sacrifice, performed by the same civilization that will spend the next century telling the world that Carthage is a death cult. Remember this moment. It is the seed. Everything that follows, the propaganda, the demonization, the genocide, grows from this root of hypocrisy buried beneath a cattle market. Half a century grinds past. Carthage loses the Second Punic War. The terms of surrender are not designed to punish the city. They are designed to permanently cripple it. Carthage surrenders its entire war elephant corps. The surviving fleet is dragged ashore and burned on the beach. Every overseas territory, Sicily, Sardinia, the Iberian colonies, is forfeit. And then comes the financial weapon. The Roman Senate imposes an indemnity of 10,000 silver talents, payable over 50 years. It is a staggering figure, calculated with precision to drain the Carthaginian treasury to the last coin and keep the economy in a state of controlled asphyxiation for 2 generations. The message is explicit. You will survive. But you will survive on your knees. You will never stand again. The Senate miscalculates. Badly. They underestimate the one thing that made Carthage dangerous in the first place. Not the elephants. Not the navy. The merchants. The Carthaginian commercial class pivots with a speed that would stagger a modern economist. Military expansion is dead. Fine. They redirect every ounce of institutional energy into agriculture and trade. The fertile black soil of the Magerda River Valley, one of the most productive agricultural zones in the ancient Mediterranean, becomes the new engine of national recovery. Millions of olive trees are planted in organized groves. Vineyards expand across every viable hillside. The rebuilt merchant fleet smaller now but faster and more efficient, dominates the regional grain trade. Carthage does not merely survive its punishment, it thrives under it. The 50-year indemnity is paid off in a fraction of the allotted time. The harbor is rebuilt. The streets are repaved. Imported marble reappears on the facades of public buildings. Carthage transforms from a defeated military power into an economic superpower, rising from the ashes of its own surrender. And for the patrician class in Rome, this resurrection is more terrifying than anything Hannibal ever accomplished on a battlefield. An enemy you crush, and who stays crushed, is manageable. An enemy you crush, and who gets richer than you, is an existential threat. In 152 BC, a Roman senator named Cato the Elder secures passage on a diplomatic mission to Carthage. He is old. He is rigid. He is ideologically incapable of accepting a world in which Carthage prospers. He expects to find a subdued, impoverished port struggling to pay its debts. What he finds instead is a metropolis pulsing with commercial energy, markets overflowing with Tyrian purple textiles, warehouses stacked with Iberian silver ingots, Nubian gold circulating through exchange houses at a rate that dwarfs the output of Rome's own provincial mines. The sheer density of wealth on display physically revolts him. Cato sails back to Italy. He walks into the Senate chamber. He wears a plain white toga, deliberately understated. He says nothing for a moment. Then he reaches into the folds of his garment and produces a single object, a ripe North African fig. He drops it onto the marble floor of the Senate. The skin is tight. The flesh is fresh. Not bruised. Not dried. Not preserved. Fresh. Cato looks at the assembled senators and delivers the implication with surgical precision. This fig was harvested from a Carthaginian orchard 3 days ago. 3 days. That is how close the enemy is. That is how quickly a Carthaginian vessel can reach the coast of Italy. The visual is devastating. Every senator in that chamber understands the subtext. If a fig can cross that distance in 3 days, so can an army. Cato ends his address with 6 words that he will repeat at the conclusion of every single speech he delivers for the rest of his political career, regardless of whether the topic is grain tariffs or road construction. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. But economic jealousy alone cannot mobilize a republic for genocide. You cannot march 80,000 soldiers across the Mediterranean and order them to exterminate a civilian population of 500,000, because Carthaginian olive oil sells for a better price. The Roman Senate needs something deeper, something that bypasses rational debate entirely and triggers a visceral, primal revulsion in the gut of every common citizen. They need moral permission, and they find it waiting in the ash-covered precinct of Ba'al Hammon. Roman politicians and state-aligned writers launch a coordinated systematic psychological operation against the Carthaginian identity. They identify the mulk ritual as the perfect vulnerability. The theology of the Tophet is complex, layered, transactional. It operates on a logic that, while horrifying, possesses an internal coherence rooted in centuries of cultural practice. The Romans do not explain this complexity. They gut it. They strip away every contextual element that might humanize the practice. They erase the fact that the primary victims were high-born women of the aristocracy who participated within a framework of elite obligation. They erase the voluntary dimension of the vows. They erase the economic and political calculus that drove the system. And into that vacuum, they inject a fabrication so visceral it overrides all critical thought. They tell the Roman public that Carthaginian priests prowl the streets at night, ripping newborn infants from the arms of screaming mothers. They describe the bronze idol of Baal as a mechanical torture device, a furnace shaped like a grinning demon that swallows living babies while drums drown out their cries. They framed the entire Carthaginian civilization not as a rival commercial empire, but as a cult of monsters who violate the most fundamental laws of nature for sport. The propaganda is elegant in its simplicity. It does not require evidence, it requires only repetition, and it works. It unifies the fractured social strata of Rome, the patricians, the equestrians, the plebeians, the freedmen, behind a single, unifying emotional consensus. Carthage is not human. Carthage must be erased. The moral architecture for genocide is complete, but we have to pause here and examine the Roman mirror, because the audacity of this projection borders on the psychotic. Rome brands Carthage as a civilization addicted to ritual murder while simultaneously operating the most elaborate, institutionalized infrastructure for recreational human death the ancient world has ever produced. The Roman state does not kill for the gods. The Roman state kills for fun. The magistrates of Rome purchase prisoners of war by the thousands from the frontier provinces. They march them into the amphitheaters. They arm them with weapons they have never trained with. They set them loose on the sand to hack each other apart, while Roman citizens sit on shaded marble benches eating imported figs and sipping watered wine. They cheer when a Thracian gladiator opens the femoral artery of a captured Gaul, and the sand darkens in a spreading circle. When a Roman general wants to celebrate a middling victory, he floods the arena floor, forces hundreds of slaves onto crude wooden platforms, and makes them reenact naval battles until the artificial lake turns pink with diluted blood. The audience applauds. The Senate approves the budget. The Republic executes its political enemies in the Tullianum, the lower chamber of the Mamertine prison carved into the bedrock beneath the Capitoline Hill. It is a windowless, airless pit. The condemned are lowered through a narrow hole in the stone ceiling into absolute darkness. The executioners strangle them with a knotted leather cord. The bodies are left in the stagnant, freezing groundwater that pools at the bottom of the chamber until they decompose into the stone. The Romans call this justice. They call the Tophet savagery. The structural hypocrisy is not a footnote. It is the foundation. The propaganda reaches critical mass. In 149 BC, the Roman Senate authorizes the Third Punic War. A massive invasion fleet is assembled and dispatched to the North African coast. The armada lands at Utica, a port city within striking distance of Carthage. The Carthaginian Senate, fully aware that their rebuilt walls are formidable, but their manpower reserves are catastrophically insufficient to withstand a sustained Roman siege, sends a delegation to the Roman camp. They offer unconditional submission, total surrender. Whatever Rome demands, Carthage will provide. The Roman consuls accept the surrender graciously. Their first demand is reasonable on its surface. They order the Carthaginians to surrender every weapon and piece of military equipment in the city as a guarantee of peaceful intentions. The Carthaginian ambassadors, believing they are purchasing survival, agree. The city complies. Citizens haul 200,000 complete sets of armor through the gates. They disassemble 2,000 catapults and ballistae piece by piece and deliver them to the Roman camp. Every bronze sword, every iron-tipped javelin, every shield, every helmet is surrendered. The armories are emptied. The city is rendered as defenseless as a newborn. The Roman consuls wait. They wait until the last cart carrying the last weapon crosses the perimeter of their siege lines. Then they summon the unarmed Carthaginian ambassadors and deliver the true verdict. The city of Carthage must be abandoned. Entirely. Immediately. Every man, woman, and child must leave. The physical city will be demolished to the foundation stones. The population is permitted to resettle, but the new location must be no closer than 10 miles from the coast. For a civilization whose entire existence depends on the sea, this is not a relocation order. It is a death sentence written in bureaucratic language. Carthage without its harbor is a body without lungs. The economy, the trade networks, the religious sites physically embedded in the coastal soil, all of it ceases to function the moment the population moves inland. The ambassadors fall to their knees in the dirt outside the Roman command tent. They beg. They offer themselves as permanent hostages. The consuls say nothing. The silence is the answer. The trap was always the trap. Rome never had any intention of allowing Carthage to survive. The disarmament was not a peace measure. It was a butcher removing the horns from the animal before the slaughter. The ambassadors return through the city gates and deliver the verdict. The reaction is instantaneous. Despair transmutes into something harder, something more volatile. The common citizens of Carthage, the dock workers, the tradesmen, the women who run the market stalls, understand in a single crystallizing moment that they have been deceived at a civilizational level. The rage ignites. Mobs drag the senators who advocated for disarmament into the open streets and beat them to death with bare hands and paving stones. Italian merchants living in the commercial quarters are hunted down and killed. The massive timber gates of the city are barred shut and reinforced. Carthage seals itself inside its own walls and prepares to fight the most powerful military force on Earth with nothing. What happens next is one of the most extraordinary episodes of collective human will in recorded history. The city of Carthage, stripped of every conventional weapon, transforms itself into a self-contained war factory in the winter of 149 BC. The priests order the sacred bronze and gold statues melted down in the temple furnaces. The molten metal is poured into crude sword molds. Citizens rip the iron hinges from their own front doors and hammer them into spearheads on makeshift anvils. The lead lining of the city's water cisterns is torn out and recast into sling bullets. Production runs around the clock. Every household becomes a forge. The output is staggering. 300 swords manufactured per day, 500 spears per day, 150 shields per day. But the engineers face a critical shortage. The torsion catapults that can hurl stones heavy enough to shatter Roman siege towers require twisted ropes of animal sinew or horsehair to generate the necessary mechanical force. There are no horses left. The animals have already been eaten. There is no sinew. The reserves are exhausted. The women of Carthage provide the solution. The noble women of the aristocracy, the priestesses, the wives of the commanders, and the common women of the lower city step forward together. They cut their hair, not symbolically, completely. They braid the harvested hair into thick, tightly wound cords and deliver them to the engineers. Human hair, when braided under sufficient tension, provides enough elasticity to power a catapult capable of launching a 100-pound stone projectile. The city arms itself with the bodies of its own people. The Roman legions advance on the walls expecting to walk through open gates into a surrendered city. Instead, they are met with a hailstorm of iron, stone, and fire. The siege of Carthage begins. It will grind on for 3 brutal, exhausting years. Roman engineers construct a massive circumvallation around the landward perimeter, a continuous trench backed by a timber palisade studded with sharpened stakes to prevent Carthaginian sorties. But the city continues to breathe through its harbor. Blockade runners, small, fast-sailing vessels operating under cover of darkness, slip through the gaps in the Roman naval cordon and deliver grain shipments that keep the population barely alive. The Roman commander understands that as long as the sea remains open, the city will not fall. The legions begin construction on a colossal engineering project. A mole, a massive artificial causeway of earth, rubble, and quarried stone, driven directly into the water across the mouth of the Carthaginian harbor. Thousands of soldiers and conscripted laborers dump tons of material into the sea day after day. The peninsula of packed stone creeps forward meter by meter, week by week. It eventually reaches the far side. The harbor mouth is sealed. The last artery feeding the city is severed. The Roman noose is now airtight. Inside the walls, starvation accelerates. The population boils leather straps. They strip bark from the ornamental trees lining the public squares and chew it for whatever caloric trace remains. The Carthaginians refuse to collapse. In a feat of engineering and collective determination that stuns the Roman high command, the citizens execute a covert counter-operation. Working in complete darkness, in absolute silence, thousands of men and women dig a brand new channel from the inner circular military dock straight out to the open Mediterranean, bypassing the Roman mole entirely. They carry the excavated earth away in small baskets, distributing it across the city to avoid creating visible mounds that Roman scouts might spot from the siege lines. When the channel is complete, they breach the final barrier. A fleet of 50 newly built triremes sails out of the secret passage into open water. Roman sentries on the mole watch in disbelief as Carthaginian warships materialize from a harbor they believe to be permanently sealed. The sheer defiance of the act fractures Roman morale for days. The mechanics of this siege, the psychological endurance, the engineering ingenuity born of absolute desperation, represent one of the most extraordinary chapters in the history of human conflict. If you want to understand the full depth of what unfolded here, the primary sources and forensic research behind this investigation are available to you right now. Look at your screen. Click the View Products button. The foundational text behind this script is a masterwork of archaeological and historical analysis that dismantles centuries of Roman propaganda and reconstructs the reality of the Punic Wars from the physical evidence. You need this book on your shelf, and while you are there, explore the full collection. We have assembled a curated selection of rare, thematic artifacts and dark historical memorabilia designed to complement investigations exactly like this one. Open the shop, see what is waiting for you, then come back. We are not done with the ashes. The Roman command structure undergoes a critical shift. In 147 BC, the Senate hands control of the siege to Scipio Aemilianus, a young general whose reputation rests not on reckless aggression, but on calculated, systematic suffocation. Scipio does not waste men on frontal assaults against fortified positions. He tightens the blockade. He reinforces the mole. He seals every remaining gap in the cordon. He understands that before he can breach the physical walls of Carthage, he must first shatter the spiritual architecture that is holding the population together. Scipio deploys the weapon. He orders his military priests to the front lines. They position themselves just beyond the effective range of the Carthaginian archers standing on the parapets, and they perform a ritual called the evocatio. It is one of the most psychologically aggressive maneuvers in the Roman religious arsenal. The priests raise their arms toward the walls of the city. They call out by name to Ba'al Hammon and Tanit, the patron deities of Carthage. They do not curse them. They do not mock them. They invite them. They formally offer the gods of Carthage a better deal: grander temples, richer offerings, eternal prestige in the city of Rome. The message aimed at the defenders on the walls is devastating in its implication. Your gods have heard our offer. Your gods are considering it. Your gods may already be walking toward our camp. The evocatio is not a prayer. It is a hostile acquisition bid for the enemy's divine protection. Spring of 146 BC. The Roman siege engines, massive wheeled towers and iron-tipped battering rams, finally punch a breach through the harbor wall at the southern edge of the city. The legions pour through the gap into the lower districts. They expect the skeletal, starving remnants of the population to throw themselves at their feet and beg for mercy. They are met instead with a ferocity that defies every Roman tactical projection. The architecture of Carthage itself becomes a weapon. The residential buildings in the harbor district are 6 stories tall, packed tightly together along streets so narrow that 2 men cannot walk abreast. The Carthaginians have barricaded every ground floor entrance with rubble and furniture. From the upper windows and rooftops, defenders rain down a torrent of roof tiles, chunks of masonry, ceramic jars filled with boiling oil, and anything heavy enough to crush a helmet. The legionaries cannot advance through the streets. They are forced to fight vertically. They breach doorways with axes and battering rams. They climb the internal staircases floor by floor, fighting hand to hand in dark, confined corridors where their superior formations mean nothing. Engineers lay heavy wooden planks across the gaps between rooftops, and Roman soldiers cross these improvised bridges 60, 80, 100 feet above the street, fighting Carthaginian defenders on the roof tiles. Men on both sides slip on blood-slicked surfaces and plunge to their deaths on the paving stones below. Scipio makes a decision. He orders the captured buildings set ablaze. The fires spread through the tightly packed urban grid with terrifying speed. Families hiding in the upper stories are burned alive. Structures weakened by the flames collapse into the streets, burying Roman soldiers and Carthaginian defenders alike under tons of burning rubble. The air becomes a choking mixture of superheated ash, vaporized limestone dust, and the unmistakable smell of burning human tissue. The street-by-street combat continues without pause for 6 consecutive days and 6 consecutive nights. The soldiers on both sides fight in rotating shifts, stepping over the dead to reach the living. The surviving Carthaginian defenders, carrying the wounded, dragging the elderly, shielding the children, withdraw to the highest ground in the city. The Bersa Hill. It is a natural citadel, steep-sided and heavily fortified, crowned by the grand temple of Eshmun, the god of healing. 50,000 people cram into the sacred precinct and the surrounding structures. They bar the heavy bronze doors. They stack anything movable against the entrances. Below them, the Roman legions assemble at the base of the hill. They interlock their shields. They clean their blades. They drink water. They look up at the citadel and prepare for the final ascent. Scipio Aemilianus stands in the ruined plaza at the foot of the Bersa. Behind him, the great library of Carthage is burning. Hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls, the accumulated intellectual output of a civilization that predates Rome by centuries, curl and blacken in the flames. The navigational charts that mapped sea routes Rome has never sailed. The agricultural treatises that taught the Mediterranean world how to cultivate olives and grapes. The mathematical texts, the poetry, the philosophical dialogues, the true, unfiltered history of a people written in their own hand. All of it converts to black ash and rises into the smoke-darkened sky. The Roman propaganda machine does not need to compete with Carthaginian scholarship. It simply needs to ensure that no Carthaginian scholarship survives. Inside the citadel, the commander of the final Carthaginian defense, a general named Hasdrubal, has retreated into the innermost chamber of the Temple of Eshmun with his wife and his children. He has watched the city die, block by block. He has watched the smoke consume the harbor. He has watched the streets he walked as a young man become corridors of fire and collapsing stone. And now, standing in the last room of the last building, in the last free city of the Carthaginian world, he prepares a final act. Not a military act. Something far more devastating. Something that will sear itself into the memory of every Roman soldier standing on the hill below. Something that Scipio Aemilianus will carry with him for the rest of his life. A horror so complete and so deliberate that the Roman legions, men who have spent 3 years soaked in blood, will not be able to look away. The Temple of Eschmoun occupies the highest point on the Bersa, a natural stone platform elevated above every rooftop, every wall, every burning district below. It is the last defensible structure in a city that has been systematically reduced to rubble and flame over 3 years of unrelenting siege. 60 wide marble steps ascend from the plaza to a pair of massive bronze doors, each one thick enough to absorb the impact of a battering ram. Behind those doors, the final 50,000 citizens of Carthage have compressed themselves into the sacred precinct, like cargo packed into the hold of a sinking ship. They carry no weapons. They have not eaten in days. Some press their lips against the stone walls to lick the moisture that condenses in the pre-dawn cold. Children sit motionless on the marble floor, too weak to cry. The Roman legions have formed an unbroken perimeter of locked shields at the base of the steps. The ring of iron is patient. It has nowhere else to be. Hasdrubal, the commanding general of the Carthaginian defense, stands inside the temple and performs a calculation that has nothing to do with tactics. The walls will be breached. The doors will be battered open or burned through. Every person inside this building will either die on the marble floor or be marched in chains to the slave markets of the Italian peninsula. There is no third outcome. The mathematics are absolute. And so Hasdrubal makes a choice that will define the final hours of Carthaginian history. He does not choose his city. He does not choose his people. He does not choose the gods whose altar stands 10 feet behind him. He chooses himself. In the dead of night, when the fires below cast long, shifting shadows across the temple walls, Hasdrubal slips through a narrow postern gate on the rear face of the citadel. He carries an olive branch. He descends the hill alone. He crosses the Roman siege lines unchallenged, because a man carrying an olive branch in the dark is either a messenger or a coward, and the Romans are happy to receive both. He reaches the command area. He finds Scipio Aemilianus, and the supreme military commander of the last free Carthaginian stronghold drops to his knees in the dirt. He presses his face against the leather of the Roman general's boots. He trades 600 years of civilization for the continued functioning of his own lungs. Scipio accepts the surrender. A living Carthaginian general is worth more to him than a dead one. Hasdrubal will be paraded through the streets of Rome in the triumphal procession. He will walk in chains before the cheering crowds. He will serve as living proof that the monster has been tamed. But inside the temple, someone is watching the dawn break over the Roman camp. Hasdrubal's wife. History did not preserve her name. The Roman chroniclers who documented every logistical detail of the siege, who recorded the tonnage of grain consumed and the number of catapults deployed, did not consider the name of this woman worth recording. What they did record, because they could not look away from it, was what she did next. When the first light of morning reaches the Bersa, Roman soldiers set torches to the dry wooden scaffolding that surrounds the temple's exterior. The timber catches instantly. Flames climb the walls and begin eating through the roof structure. Thick, acrid smoke floods the upper levels of the sanctuary. The bronze doors glow with conducted heat. Inside, the trapped citizens begin to suffocate, and then a figure appears on the rooftop of the burning temple, visible to every Roman soldier on the hill and every officer in the camp below. She is not dressed in the rags of a siege survivor. She wears the full ceremonial regalia of a Carthaginian noblewoman of the highest rank. Heavy Tyrian purple silk drapes from her shoulders, the same dye that built the empire, the same color that kings across 3 continents paid fortunes to possess. Thick bands of solid gold coil around her forearms. Her hair is arranged. Her posture is vertical. She stands on the edge of a burning roof above a dying city, and she looks like she is presiding over a state function. She looks down the hill. She finds her husband. He is sitting near the Roman command tent. He is alive. He is breathing. He is comfortable. The distance between the burning roof and the Roman camp is perhaps 300 meters, but every account agrees that what happens next is heard clearly by the soldiers below. She raises her voice above the roar of the collapsing structure. She does not plead. She does not negotiate. She delivers a judgment. She curses Hasdrubal by name. She calls him a traitor to his bloodline and a coward before the gods he swore to serve. She condemns him not for losing the war, but for choosing survival over the dignity of a death that matched the magnitude of what was being lost. The Roman soldiers stand motionless. The legionaries who have spent 3 years battering this city into submission fall silent on the hillside and watch a woman they will never name deliver a speech they will never forget. She does not turn to face the Romans. She does not address them at all. She denies them the satisfaction of a final surrender, a final plea, a final acknowledgement that their victory matters. She turns her back to the legions. She faces the interior of the burning temple, and she walks forward. She steps directly into the center of the fire. The roof structure collapses inward around her. The flames consume the silk, the gold, the flesh, the last autonomous act of Carthaginian sovereignty. She falls with the temple. She falls with the city. She falls with 6 centuries of accumulated power, knowledge, and identity. And she takes it all into the ash on her own terms. The fall of the Bersa ends the physical war. What begins immediately afterward is something far more systematic and far more permanent. The Roman Senate does not issue an order to occupy Carthage. It issues an order to unmake it. The distinction is critical. Occupation preserves the conquered space for Roman use. Erasure eliminates the possibility that the conquered space ever existed as anything other than what Rome decides it was. The legionaries spend 17 consecutive days burning the lower districts of the city. The fires are so sustained and so intense that the limestone building blocks vitrify, their calcium structure fusing into a glass-like substance that archaeologists will identify 2,000 years later as evidence of temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. When the flames finally exhaust the available fuel, the Roman engineering corps moves in with organized labor battalions. They do not salt the earth. That detail, repeated in countless textbooks and popular histories, is a myth fabricated by later historians who wanted the destruction to sound even more biblical than it already was. Salt was an expensive commodity in the ancient Mediterranean. The Romans did not waste valuable trade goods on symbolic gestures. They used something far cheaper and far more effective. They used labor and time. Work crews dismantled the 34 miles of city walls stone by stone. The limestone blocks that took generations to quarry and position are pried apart and toppled. The imported marble columns that lined the avenues of the merchant district are shattered with iron sledgehammers. Engineers excavate the underwater foundations of the Kothon harbor, pulling up the pilings and jetties that made Carthage the dominant naval power of the Western Mediterranean. Iron plows are dragged across the cleared ground to break up the urban grid, churning the foundation layers into loose rubble. The Senate issues a formal religious curse on the land. The site is declared sacred, consecrated to the gods of the underworld. Any person who attempts to build a permanent structure on the cursed ground faces execution under Roman sacred law. But the most devastating phase of the destruction is not physical. It is archival. The Romans seized the vast literary holdings of Carthage. The libraries contain centuries of accumulated knowledge, navigational charts mapping Atlantic trade routes that Roman sailors have never attempted, agricultural manuals so advanced that the Roman Senate will later commission their translation into Latin, the only Carthaginian texts they deem worth preserving, because the information is too valuable to destroy. Mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, legal codes, epic poetry, philosophical dialogues. The written memory of an entire civilization recorded in the Punic script across hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls. The Senate distributes the bulk of these archives to their Numidian allies as a political gift. The scrolls are scattered across North Africa. Without a centralized system of preservation, without a literate population that reads Punic, the documents decay. They rot in provincial storehouses. They are consumed by insects and moisture. Within a generation, the written voice of Carthage falls silent. The Punic language itself, once spoken across the Western Mediterranean from the coast of North Africa to the shores of Iberia, is systematically displaced by Latin. Within 2 centuries, it is functionally extinct as a living language. Rome does not merely defeat Carthage on the battlefield. It eliminates the possibility that Carthage can ever tell its own story. The dead cannot testify. The voiceless cannot object. The erased cannot correct the record. Centuries pass. The physical ruins of Carthage sink beneath accumulating layers of dirt, debris, and new construction. A Roman colonial city, built directly on top of the pulverized skeleton of the old one, eventually rises on the same peninsula. The Mediterranean world moves on. The specific, intricate mechanics of the Carthaginian Empire, its commercial networks, its theological frameworks, its political institutions, fade from active memory. What remains are the Roman accounts, the histories of Livy, the narratives of Diodorus Siculus, the moral commentaries of Plutarch. These texts become the unchallenged foundation of everything the Western world believes about Carthage for the next 2,000 years. Generations of scholars, working exclusively from Roman sources, construct an image of the Carthaginians as fanatics who fed their own children to a bronze furnace in exchange for military victories. The Tophet becomes the defining symbol of ancient barbarism. The Roman propaganda achieves a form of immortality. The silence holds for nearly 2 millennia. It breaks in 1921. A French colonial official named François Icard receives an unusual report in his office in Tunis. Local informants have discovered evidence of illegal excavation near the coastline in the neighborhood of Salambo, just south of the old city center. Grave robbers have uncovered a cluster of strange carved stones buried in a vacant lot a few hundred meters from the ancient shoreline. Icard travels to the site personally. He brings a small team of local laborers. They begin to dig. They cut through the uppermost layer of debris, a stratum of Roman-era construction rubble, broken roof tiles, and fragments of imperial pottery. They dig deeper. They pass through a layer of Byzantine-period artifacts. They continue downward. They reach bedrock, and beneath 2,000 years of accumulated sediment, they find it. A vast open-air precinct, buried intact. Thousands of carved limestone stelae stand upright in the subterranean darkness, packed so tightly together they resemble a stone forest. The carved surfaces bear the crescent moon symbol of Ba'al Hammon. The distinctive triangular emblem of Tanit is etched into dozens of the markers. The workers dig beneath the stelae. They find rows of small clay urns, sealed with hardened clay stoppers, arranged in deliberate, organized patterns. Icard kneels in the excavation trench. He brushes the compacted soil from the surface of the first urn. He carefully removes the stopper. He looks inside. Calcined bone fragments. A thick bed of fine, powdery ash. Dark residue coating the interior walls of the vessel. The Tophet of Salambo is not a literary invention. It is not a Roman fabrication designed to horrify. It is a physical location. It exists. It has always existed. It was simply waiting beneath the dirt for someone to ask what it actually contains. The excavation expands over the following decades. Archaeologists eventually identify 7 distinct stratigraphic layers of burials stacked vertically on top of each other, each layer corresponding to a different historical period. The deepest deposits date to the founding era of the city. The uppermost layers date to the final decades before the Roman destruction. The total span covers approximately 6 centuries of continuous use. Conservative estimates place the number of individual urns in the precinct at over 20,000. The scale silences the academic community. For the better part of a century, the sheer volume of remains is interpreted as confirmation of the Roman literary accounts. 20,000 urns means 20,000 sacrifices. The bones are assumed to be the victims of the bronze god. Case closed. But the earth does not testify on command. It waits. It waits for the questions to become precise enough to deserve answers. In the early decades of the 21st century, the analytical tools available to forensic science reach a threshold of precision that the original excavators could never have imagined. An international team of osteologists, specialists in the identification and analysis of skeletal remains, secures access to the sealed urns from the crisis period layers, the strata corresponding to the most intense phases of the Punic Wars. They do not consult Livy. They do not reference Diodorus. They carry the bone fragments into sterile laboratory environments and subject them to scanning electron microscopy and isotopic analysis. The results dismantle a narrative that has stood unchallenged for over 2,000 years. The Roman historians stated explicitly and repeatedly that the primary victims of the Tophet were infants and small children. The forensic evidence from the crisis period urns tells a fundamentally different story. The osteologists examined the degree of epiphyseal fusion in the recovered joint fragments, the biological process by which the growth plates of the skeleton seal as a person matures. They analyze the internal architecture of the trabecular bone, the spongy lattice structure whose density and pattern vary predictably with age. They measure the dimensional proportions of the pelvic fragments. The data converges on a single, unambiguous conclusion. The remains in these urns do not belong to children. They belong to fully mature adults. And the skeletal markers indicate, with a high degree of confidence, that these adults were female. The team conducts strontium isotope analysis on the fragments of surviving tooth enamel recovered from the urns. Strontium is a trace element present in groundwater. During childhood, as the permanent teeth form, strontium from the local water supply is incorporated into the crystalline structure of the enamel. It remains there permanently, functioning as an indelible chemical signature of the geographical region where the individual spent their early years. The analysis confirms that these women were not foreign captives purchased or abducted from distant provinces. They were not enslaved Gauls or Iberians dragged to the altar against their will. The strontium signatures match the water profile of the Magerda River Valley. These women were born in Carthage. They grew up in Carthage. They drank Carthaginian water. They were local. They were native. They were the aristocratic elite. The forensic team then conducts a systematic examination of the bone surfaces under high magnification, searching for evidence of perimortem trauma, physical damage inflicted at or near the time of death. They scan the cervical vertebrae for the characteristic incision marks left by a sacrificial blade drawn across the throat. They examine the cranial vault fragments for the radial fracture patterns produced by blunt force impact. They find nothing. The bone surfaces are clean. There are no cut marks. There are no impact fractures. There are no defensive wounds on the forearm fragments. What the bones do show is extensive thermal alteration. The fragments are deeply warped, shrunken, and calcined to a chalky white, consistent with prolonged exposure to temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius. The fire was real. The fire was intense. The fire was sustained. But the bones cannot answer the one question that matters most. They cannot tell the scientists whether these women were alive when the flames reached them. This is the precise fracture point where historical analysis collapses into irreducible ambiguity. We are left standing between two possibilities. Both are fully consistent with the physical evidence. Both are devastating, and the bones refuse to choose between them. The first possibility follows the internal logic of the Mulk to its terminal conclusion. During the most catastrophic phases of the Punic Wars, when the Roman legions closed around the city like a fist, the merchant aristocracy activated their final contractual obligation with the divine. They led their own wives and daughters, the most valuable human assets in their possession, down the processional route to the sanctuary of Tanit. The women, conditioned by a lifetime of theological certainty, understood their role in the transaction. They surrendered their bodies to the superheated bronze arms of the idol. They burned alive. They paid the ultimate premium on a divine insurance policy that never paid out. The salvation never came. The legions breached the walls anyway. The contract was honored in full by the human party. The divine party defaulted. The second possibility is a complete inversion. The Tophet was never a slaughterhouse. It was a sacred cemetery. In the ancient Mediterranean, mortality among high-born women was staggeringly high. Complications during childbirth killed a significant percentage of women in every social class. But the deaths of aristocratic women were recorded and ritualized with particular gravity. Epidemic diseases, typhoid, cholera, dysentery, swept through densely populated port cities with lethal regularity. When these noble women died of natural causes, their families honored them with the highest funerary rites available in Carthaginian religious practice. They cremated the bodies at extreme temperatures. They collected the ashes in ceremonial urns. They placed those urns in the most sacred ground the city possessed, the precinct of Ba'al Hammon and Tanit, and erected carved stelae to mark the burial. The inscriptions were formulaic because funerary inscriptions in every ancient culture are formulaic. The language of grief follows patterns. It always has. If this second interpretation is correct, the implications are almost too large to process. It means the Roman Senate identified a cemetery, a place where the Carthaginian elite mourned and buried their mothers, their wives, their daughters. And the Roman propagandists looked at those graves and saw an opportunity. They deliberately stripped away the grief. They erased the context of natural death and sacred burial. They replaced it with a narrative of demonic ritual murder so vivid, so viscerally repulsive, that it bypassed every rational defense mechanism in the Roman public consciousness. They weaponized the ashes of dead women to manufacture moral permission for the extermination of an entire civilization. If this is what happened, then the destruction of Carthage is not merely a military conquest. It is the most successful act of historical fraud ever committed. A crime against truth so perfectly executed that it maintained its credibility for over 2,000 years. We cannot compel the bones to testify. The dead keep their silence with an absoluteness that no forensic technique can overcome, but we can examine the perpetrators. We can study the behavior of the side that survived. The Romans leveled the city to its foundation stones. They massacred the military-age men. They sold the surviving women and children into slavery across 3 continents. They seized the physical evidence of the Tophet and buried it under meters of demolition debris. They burned the libraries. They scattered the archives. They extinguished the language. And then, standing in the ashes of a civilization they had systematically erased from the physical world, they picked up their pens and wrote the only version of the story that would ever be told. They looked at the victims of their genocide and, with calculated precision, described them as monsters. History is not a neutral record of events. It never has been. History is the narrative constructed by the people who are still breathing when the fire goes out. The Carthaginians built the most sophisticated commercial empire the ancient Mediterranean had ever seen. They dominated the sea lanes. They extracted wealth from the earth on an industrial scale. They negotiated with their gods in a currency of ash and obligation. They defended their city with a ferocity that stunned the most powerful military machine in the ancient world. And they lost. They lost the war. They lost their walls. They lost their libraries. They lost their language. And because they lost all of those things, they lost the single asset that matters more than any of them. They lost the right to be remembered on their own terms. The Roman propaganda operation did not merely survive the fall of Carthage. It outlived the Roman Empire itself. It outlived the medieval period. It outlived the Renaissance. It persisted, unchallenged, into the modern era. It is arguably the most durable psychological weapon ever deployed. It proves, with a clarity that should unsettle every person watching this, that the most dangerous instrument on any battlefield is not the sword, the catapult, or the battering ram. It is the pen. It is the ability to write the story after the enemy can no longer speak. The truth of Carthage exists in a permanent state of suspension. It hangs between 2 irreconcilable poles. On one side, the genuine possibility that the Tophet was exactly what the Romans said it was, a site of ritualized human destruction driven by a theology so transactional that it consumed the bodies of its own elite to service its debts with the divine. On the other side, the equally genuine possibility that the Tophet was a sacred burial ground, and that every horror story attached to it was manufactured by an empire that needed moral cover for an act of annihilation. The sealed urns of Salammbô hold the answer, but the urns are not talking. The bones are calcined beyond the reach of any question we currently know how to ask. And that silence, that permanent, irreducible silence, is the final and most complete victory that Rome ever achieved over Carthage. Thank you for walking through the ashes with us and staying until the very end. If you want to help us keep pulling these buried truths out of the ground, take a moment right now to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. You have just watched another premium documentary by Ancestral, your ultimate dark history hub on YouTube. The video on your screen right now holds the next chapter. Click it and continue your journey through the archives. We will see you inside.